Have you ever walked into a place and felt invisible, judged before you could even speak? Marcus stepped into the gleaming Elite Motors showroom in Scottsdale, Arizona, his worn hoodie and scuffed sneakers, a stark contrast to the polished luxury cars sparkling under the desert sun. The air hummed with the scent of leather and wealth, but the staff's glances screamed he didn't belong. Little did the manager know, this unassuming man was about to flip her world upside down with a secret that would leave the entire dealership stunned. Marcus moved with quiet dignity, his calm gaze hiding a power nobody saw coming. The desert sun beat down on Scottsdale, Arizona, as Marcus Thompson, a 45-year-old tech entrepreneur, pulled his beat-up 90s sedan into the lot of Elite Motors, the high-end car dealership he'd quietly acquired months ago. Dressed in a faded hoodie, worn jeans, and scuffed sneakers, he looked more like a delivery driver than the multimillionaire who'd built a tech empire from nothing. Marcus had started as a coder in a small Ohio town, teaching himself to program on a second-hand computer in a cramped apartment. Through relentless grit, he turned a single app into a software giant, earning him wealth and respect in boardrooms, but not always on the street. Years ago, a bank teller had scoffed at his casual attire, denying him a loan with a smirk, assuming he was a nobody. That rejection still burned, fueling his mission to expose and dismantle prejudice. Today, he'd chosen his outfit deliberately, wanting to test the dealership's culture without the shield of his title. As he stepped out, the shimmering glass facade of Elite Motors loomed, its rows of sleek Porsches and Ferraris gleaming under bright lights. Inside, the air was cool, scented with leather and wax, a temple to luxury where staff catered to an elite clientele. Marcus pushed open the glass doors, and the hum of conversation among the sharply dressed employees, suits pressed, smiles rehearsed, faded. Their eyes flicked to his hoodie, then away, a silent judgment that prickled his skin. He caught a salesman's raised eyebrow and a receptionist's quick glance, their unspoken verdict clear. He didn't belong. Marcus's lips twitched with a faint smile. He'd expected this. His success had taught him to navigate these moments with calm, but the weight of their stares stirred memories of that bank teller, of countless times he'd been underestimated for his appearance. Growing up, he'd watched his parents, hardworking teachers, face subtle slights for their modest clothes or skin color, moments that shaped his resolve to prove worth wasn't tied to looks. Now, as owner of Elite Motors, he wasn't here to flaunt power, but to observe, to see if his dealership lived up to his vision of fairness. He walked deeper into the showroom, hands in his pockets, his casual stride at odds with the polished floor, reflecting his reflection next to a $200,000 coupe. A young salesman adjusted his tie, avoiding eye contact, while a woman with a clipboard, likely the manager, watched him from across the room, her gaze sharp and assessing. Marcus paused by a silver Maserati, running a finger along its curve, feeling the cool metal. He knew every spec of these cars, not from wealth, but from a lifelong love of engineering. Yet the staff saw only the hoodie, not the man who'd outsmarted competitors to build a fortune. The tension in the air was familiar, a mix of dismissal and suspicion he'd faced too often. But Marcus stood tall, his calm demeanor a shield, his mind already calculating how this visit would unfold. He wasn't just a customer today, he was a test, a mirror held up to the dealership's soul. And as the manager's heels clicked closer, her smile tight and insincere, Marcus knew the real show was about to begin, one that would reveal more than anyone in this gleaming showroom expected. Marcus stood in the heart of Elite Motors, the Scottsdale showroom's polished floors reflecting the gleam of luxury cars under bright lights, their curves whispering wealth. The air was crisp with the scent of leather, but the atmosphere shifted as he lingered by a sleek black Porsche. A woman approached, her heels clicking with purpose across the tile. Karen, the manager, was in her early 50s, her tailored blazer and sharp bob exuding authority. Her smile was tight, more performance than warmth, as she stopped a few feet away. "Excuse me, sir, are you looking for the service department?" she asked, her tone polite but edged with assumption. Marcus met her gaze, his expression calm, hands still in his hoodie pockets. "Just browsing," he replied, nodding toward the Porsche. "Interested in this one?" Karen's eyes flicked over his faded jeans and sneakers, her smile faltering. Well, these models are quite exclusive, she said, her voice dipping into condescension. Perhaps I can direct you to something more practical? Marcus raised an eyebrow, unfazed. I'd like to know more about this one's specs, he said, gesturing to the car. Karen hesitated, then launched into a clipped explanation, her words rushed, as if he couldn't possibly understand. Across the showroom, a young salesman adjusted his tie, avoiding Marcus's direction, while a receptionist whispered to a colleague, their glances darting his way. The word type hung faintly in the air, barely audible but sharp enough to sting. Marcus caught it, his lips twitching slightly, but he kept his cool, asking, "What's the horsepower on this model?" Karen interrupted before he finished, her patience thinning. Look, these cars start at six figures. We usually require pre-qualification for serious buyers. Her tone suggested he was anything but serious. Marcus tilted his head, his voice steady. Interesting. What makes you think I'm not qualified? The question hung, simple but pointed, and Karen's smile tightened further. I'm just trying to save your time, she said, her words clipped. We cater to a specific clientele here. The implication was clear, and Marcus felt the familiar weight of being sized up, his worth reduced to his appearance. He stepped toward a silver Maserati, its sleek lines catching the light. This one's nice, he said, his fingers brushing the door handle. Karen's eyes narrowed and she stepped closer, her voice sharper now. Please don't touch the vehicles, she said, as if he were a child wandering too close to fragile glass. These are for serious inquiries only. A nearby salesman smirked, turning away to shuffle papers, while another employee lingered by the coffee machine, watching Marcus with thinly veiled suspicion. The room felt smaller, the air thick with judgment. Marcus nodded slowly, stepping back, his hands returning to his pockets. So, what would you recommend for someone like me? He asked, his tone light but his eyes locked on hers. Karen blinked, caught off guard, but recovered quickly. There's a dealership down the road with more budget-friendly options, she said, her voice dripping with false courtesy. They specialize in pre-owned vehicles, more in line with, well, your situation. The word situation landed like a jab, and Marcus felt the sting, though his face remained composed. He'd heard this before. Different words, same script. The salesman by the desk stifled a chuckle, pretending to check his phone, while the receptionist's whispers grew bolder, her colleague nodding in agreement. Karen pressed on, sensing she had the upper hand. I'm just being realistic, she said, crossing her arms. Not everyone can shop at Elite Motors. It's better to be upfront than waste your time. Marcus's gaze didn't waver, his calm a stark contrast to her growing impatience. Realistic, he repeated almost to himself, as if tasting the word. So you've decided who I am based on what I'm wearing? Karen's lips pursed, her confidence faltering for a split second before she doubled down. I've been in this business long enough to know who's serious, she said, her voice now openly dismissive. You don't exactly fit the profile. The showroom's hum seemed to quiet, the staff's subtle glances now overt stares. A security guard by the entrance shifted his weight, eyeing Marcus as if expecting trouble. The tension coiled tighter, each microaggression stacking like bricks. Marcus glanced around, taking in the gleaming cars and the staff's coded looks, his mind flashing to a memory of his father being turned away from a store for looking out of place. He pushed the thought aside, focusing on the moment. Let's say I'm interested in that Maserati, he said, pointing. Can we talk financing? Karen's smile vanished entirely, replaced by a flash of irritation. Sir, I don't think you understand, she said, her voice rising just enough to draw attention. These cars aren't for window shoppers. If you're not serious, I'll have to ask you to leave. The words hit like a slap, the ultimate insult delivered with a mix of disdain and authority. The salesman by the desk froze, his phone forgotten, while the receptionist's whispers stopped, her eyes wide. The security guard took a step forward, his hand resting on his radio. Marcus stood still, his expression unreadable, the weight of the room pressing against him. He could feel the anger bubbling in his chest, but he'd learned long ago to channel it into control. Window shoppers, he said softly, his voice cutting through the silence. That's what you think I am? Karen straightened, her clipboard clutched like a shield. I'm just doing my job, she said, but her tone wavered, sensing she'd crossed a line. Marcus nodded, his calm unshaken, though his eyes held a glint of something sharper. Your job, he said, pausing. What if I told you I'd like to speak to the owner? Karen's eyebrows shot up, a laugh escaping her before she could stop it. The owner, she said, her voice thick with skepticism. They don't just drop by for casual chats. I'm sorry, but this is getting ridiculous. She gestured toward the door, her patience gone. If you're not leaving, I'll have security escort you out. The guard stepped closer, his presence looming, while the staff watched, some with smirks, others with unease. Marcus didn't move, his hands still in his pockets, his voice steady as ever. What makes you so sure I don't belong here? He asked again, quieter this time, but the question carried a weight that made Karen falter. Her confidence cracked, just for a moment, as the room held its breath. Marcus's calm was a weapon, frustrating her attempts to dismiss him, and the tension peaked, every eye on him, waiting for his next move. He reached for his phone, his fingers deliberate, and said, "Let's see what the owner thinks about this." The words were simple, but they landed like a spark in dry grass, setting the stage for what was to come. The showroom at Elite Motors buzzed with tension, the air heavy as Karen's words, "I'll have security escort you out," hung like a challenge. Marcus stood by the silver Maserati, his hoodie and jeans a stark contrast to the gleaming luxury around him, his calm demeanor unshaken despite the security guard's looming presence. The staff watched, some smirking, others shifting uneasily, as Karen's clipboard trembled slightly in her grip. Marcus's eyes, steady and unyielding, met hers, and he reached into his pocket with deliberate slowness, pulling out his phone. "Let's see what the owner thinks about this," he said, his voice low but carrying a weight that made the room pause. Karen's lips curled into a skeptical smirk, her confidence bolstered by the staff's silent agreement that this man was out of place. "Go ahead, make your call," she said, her tone dripping with mockery. "The owner doesn't just show up for random complaints." Marcus didn't flinch, his fingers scrolling through his contacts as he dialed a number, his expression unreadable. "Hey, Lisa," he said into the phone, his voice casual but firm. "I'm at Elite Motors. Can you swing by and confirm my visit? There's a bit of a misunderstanding here." Karen rolled her eyes, crossing her arms, certain this was a bluff. The salesman by the desk stifled a laugh, while the receptionist whispered to a colleague, their eyes darting to Marcus. The security guard stood closer, his hand still on his radio, ready to act. Minutes ticked by, the showroom's hum replaced by an expectant silence, every glance fixed on Marcus, who leaned casually against the Maserati, his calm a stark contrast to the growing unease around him. The glass doors swung open, and a woman strode in, her tailored navy suit and confident stride commanding attention. Lisa Bennett, the COO of Marcus's tech empire, carried an air of authority, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor. The staff froze, sensing a shift as she scanned the room and locked eyes with Marcus. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice clear and professional. "Sorry for the delay, sir. I didn't realize you'd be visiting Elite Motors today." The words landed like a thunderclap. Karen's clipboard slipped slightly, her face draining of color as her jaw dropped. The salesman's phone clattered to the desk, and the receptionist's whispers died mid-sentence. "Mr. Thompson?" Karen echoed, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes wide with disbelief. Lisa nodded, her gaze cool as she turned to Karen. "Marcus Thompson, CEO and owner of Elite Motors. I assume you're the manager?" The showroom fell silent, the weight of the revelation pressing down on every soul present. Karen stammered, her polished facade crumbling. I didn't know," she managed, her voice shaking as she took a step back, clutching her clipboard like a lifeline. The security guard hesitated, his hand dropping from his radio, while the other employees exchanged shocked glances, some whispering in disbelief. Marcus slipped his phone back into his pocket, his expression still calm, but his eyes held a glint of authority that hadn't been there before. "You didn't know," he said, his voice soft but cutting. "But you assumed. Tell me, Karen, Would you have treated me this way if I'd walked in here wearing a suit? The question sliced through the room, exposing her bias with surgical precision. Karen opened her mouth, but no words came, her face now ashen. The salesman looked down, avoiding Marcus's gaze while the receptionist fidgeted, her earlier confidence gone. Marcus stepped forward, his presence commanding despite his casual attire. You saw a hoodie and decided I didn't belong, he continued, his tone measured but firm. You didn't ask who I was or what I wanted. You judged me before I could even speak. Karen's lips trembled, her attempt to backtrack faltering. I'm so sorry, Mr. Thompson, she said, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean… Marcus raised a hand, cutting her off gently but firmly. It's not about what you meant, he said. It's about what you did. And it's not just about me. It's about every person who walks through these doors and gets judged for how they look. The staff stood frozen, the weight of his words sinking in. Lisa glanced at Marcus, a faint nod of approval in her eyes as the showroom's atmosphere shifted from tension to stunned realization. Marcus's gaze swept the room, taking in the wide-eyed employees, the security guard now standing awkwardly by the door, and Karen, who looked like she might collapse under the weight of her mistake. I didn't come here to play games, Marcus said, his voice steady but resonant. I came to see how my dealership treats people, and what I saw today was disappointing. He paused, letting the silence amplify his words. But we're going to fix this, he added, his tone shifting to one of quiet resolve. Starting now. The promise hung in the air, a spark of justice that left the staff speechless and the audience craving what would come next. The power dynamic flipped in a moment that felt like retribution, but carried the weight of something bigger. Marcus stood at the head of the sleek conference room at Elite Motors, the glass walls reflecting the tense faces of the staff seated before him. The Scottsdale sun streamed through, casting long shadows as he surveyed the group, his hoodie a quiet rebellion against the polished suits around him. Karen sat near the back, her clipboard forgotten, her usual confidence replaced by a nervous stillness. Thank you for gathering on short notice, Marcus began, his voice steady, carrying the weight of authority earned through years of overcoming doubt. I'm Marcus Thompson, and as of last quarter, I'm the owner of Elite Motors. Murmurs rippled through the room, some eyes widening, others dropping in shame. Karen's face flushed, her hands clasped tightly. I came here today not as your boss, but as a customer, he continued, to see how you treat someone you don't expect to matter. What I experienced was a culture that judges before it listens. His words were calm but piercing, and the room fell silent. Karen, he said, his gaze settling on her, you didn't see a customer. You saw a stereotype. That's the problem we're fixing. The verbal strike landed, sharp but restrained, and Karen looked away, her silence in admission. Marcus didn't fire her. Instead, he announced mandatory bias training for all staff and a performance review for her, emphasizing accountability over punishment. This isn't about one person, he said, his tone firm. It's about every customer who walks through those doors and deserves respect, no matter how they look. The staff nodded, some hesitantly, others with conviction, as Lisa, the COO, stood by the door, her approval evident. Marcus stepped away from the table, his hands resting lightly on its edge. We're implementing a customer feedback system, he added, to ensure every voice is heard. Excellence isn't just about the cars we sell, it's about the trust we build. The room absorbed his words, the air thick with the promise of change. As the staff filed out, Marcus lingered, his gaze drifting to the showroom's gleaming cars. Alone, he let his calm facade soften, his mind wandering to a memory of his teenage self. Turned away from a store for looking suspicious, the sting of dismissal as fresh now as it was then. He'd spent years proving himself, through code, through deals, through sheer will. Yet the exhaustion of being judged for his skin or clothes never faded. Standing here in the dealership he owned, he felt the weight of that fight, but also a spark of hope. He vowed to make Elite Motors a place where no one felt invisible, where worth wasn't measured by appearances. The lesson wasn't just for the staff, it was for him too. Judging based on looks didn't just harm the judged, it diminished the judger, blinding them to potential and humanity. Marcus knew small acts of bias, like Karen's, reflected deeper systemic flaws, and change began with holding oneself accountable. By standing firm in his identity, he challenged the dealership's culture, and he believed others could do the same, reshaping environments one interaction at a time. As he walked back into the showroom, the car's reflections caught his eye, a reminder of the work ahead. He wasn't naive. Changing a culture took time, but it started here, today, with a commitment to fairness. A young salesman approached, hesitant. "Mr. Thompson, I'm sorry," he said, his voice low. "I didn't realize. I'll do better." Marcus nodded, his expression softening. "I believe you can," he said. "Start by seeing people, not assumptions." The salesman nodded, a flicker of resolve in his eyes, and Marcus felt a quiet optimism. This wasn't just about Elite Motors. It was about showing what was possible when you refused to let prejudice define you. He'd turned a moment of humiliation into a catalyst for change, and that felt like a victory worth building on. As he stepped outside, the desert heat greeted him, but so did a sense of purpose. Every person who walked through these doors deserved to be seen, and Marcus was determined to make that the standard, one day, one interaction at a time. Marcus Thompson walked into Elite Motors as an invisible man, dismissed for his hoodie and judged by his appearance. Yet he left as a catalyst for change, turning a painful moment into a powerful stand against prejudice. His calm authority exposed a culture of bias and set the stage for a new standard of respect, proving that one person's resolve can shift an entire system. The lesson rings clear. Prejudice thrives in silence, but change begins when we speak up and challenge assumptions. Marcus's journey reminds us that standing firm in who we are can reshape the world around us, one interaction at a time. His story isn't just about justice. It's about hope, about building spaces where everyone is seen for their worth. Love this story? Subscribe to X Daily Stories for more tales of triumph and inspiration that spark reflection and action. Hit the bell to never miss an upload and join us in celebrating those who turn adversity into progress. Let's keep the conversation going and make change happen together.